So I have to be honest here, I actually only very recently learned of this game's existence myself, the day that I wrote this script in fact. Normally when I open one of the main muted Discord servers I'm in, I don't find anything of any real worth. Some arguments here, some softcore porn there, the usual. But on this one occasion, I found something that was truly worth the dive into the cesspit of an open Discord server, this GIF. Now, two things strike me about this GIF. The first is the absolutely stellar sprite work on display here. It's very reminiscent of SNK's Art of Fighting 3 sprites, the kind of sprite work that is very rarely stumbled upon. The second thing that stood out were the designs of the two characters here. I've never seen them before, yet they seem strangely familiar to me. More on that later though. So what is this game? Who made it? And why have you never heard of it? I'm going to answer all of these questions and more as I take a deep dive into this uniquely rare fighting game, Daraku Tenshi, The Fallen Angels. The fighting game market in 1998 was a pretty great time for the genre. It was slap bang in the middle of what many consider to be the peak of Capcom's fighting game output. Street Fighter 3 New Generation and Second Impact were released the previous year in 1997 and featured some incredible sprite work thanks to Capcom's new CPS3 engine, while Street Fighter Alpha 3, running on the CPS2 engine, would soon release later in the year and would become one of the most popular entries in the series, not to mention the myriad of other fighting games Capcom were putting out at the time. Meanwhile in Osaka, Japan, SNK were pumping out hit after hit. Releasing the highly popular and well regarded The King of Fighters 98 that year, the series had seen great success in numerous countries after concluding their Orochi saga the previous year. Namco too were enjoying great success with their latest release Tekken 3, which took arcades by storm the previous year. So what about Psikyo? Never heard of them? Well, in 1998, the Japanese video game developer and publisher were working on their own fighting game set to be released in arcades that same year. This was Psikyo's second attempt at entering the 2D versus fighting game genre after 1994's Battle K-Road, a rather forgettable arcade game that's also mild success in Japan. Not wanting to miss out on the fighting game boom kickstarted by Capcom's Street Fighter 2, Psikyo set out to make their most ambitious title yet. The name? Daraku Tenshi, otherwise known as The Fallen Angels in English. However, the world would never get to see this game for themselves, as after a rushed and incomplete arcade release in Japan, the game would be pulled back in development before being abandoned entirely, ultimately remaining incomplete to this day. It's a tragic story and a solemn reminder of the harsh world of game development. Daraku Tenshi had a solid base build. It featured 8 playable characters, a sub-boss, a final boss, and some robust gameplay, but for reasons that we may never know, Psikyo had to close the game before it could be fully completed. However, thanks to the efforts and power of video game emulation, the game is able to be played by anyone who can get their hands on it, saved from the brink of obscurity thanks to a passionate fighting game community. As a result, today I'm able to spend some time with this unfinished piece of fighting game history and tell you all you need to know about it. So where to begin? The story, of course. If you've watched my other videos on this channel, then you're no doubt aware that this is a fighting game story channel first and foremost, so you shouldn't be too surprised about this. Upon booting the game up, you're met by a very quick rolling wall of text. Okay, shit, slow down, man. To summarise, the game is set in 2010, 10 years after a massive earthquake shook the core of a computer-controlled city that had been surviving on a thin layer of peace built by information control. With their control destroyed and the landmass their city sat on cut off from the mainland, the inhabitants of the city begin to war with each other for the useless vestiges of power that remained. With the city in complete disarray, sex, crime and drugs begin to take over as the city decayed from within. In a twisted sense of irony, what's left of the city is renamed Eden, the Lost Paradise. Now, due to this game being unfinished, it's nearly impossible to get a full idea of what this game's story was going to be, so unfortunately, there's no real way for me to do a full what happened in video on this game. However, we're still able to piece together some of this game's story due to the backgrounds of some of the characters that make up this game's roster. Starting with Cool, and yes, his name is actually Cool, a 24-year-old thief who is well known in the criminal underworld of Eden. Cool values his own freedom above all else, and hates anything that might confine him. During the events of the Fallen Angels, a man named Carlos infringes on Cool's territory, and Cool sets out in Eden to find him and get revenge. Harry Ness is a 34-year-old captain of the United States Marine Corps and is sent to Eden by the President in order to quell the situation. Harry has a daughter, but is currently separated from his wife due to him constantly being away due to his job. Taro is something, I guess. There's really not a lot of information out there about him, unfortunately, other than the fact that he might have been created by Carlos and that he wishes to be human. I'm gonna butcher these names. Yuriren and Yuiran are 20-year-old twins that own a bar called Windfish, where Yuriren sings and Yuiran bartends. Though actually born a man, Yuiren is a cross-dresser and often fights with the tomboyish Yuiran over acting like more of a lady, which she greatly resents, with her generally disliking her sibling. Ruchio Roche is a 16-year-old boy who was trained as an assassin in Eden's criminal underworld. Though he managed to escape from the assassins that had trained him 2 years ago, Roche still offers his services as a hired killer. Toraro Onigawara is a 47-year-old martial artist who lives and breathes karate even after becoming homeless. In the past, he once taught martial arts to soldiers, even training a young Harry Ness. Haiji Mibu is a young man who has a storied past with Carlos, who had once attempted to make human weapons in a project known as the Ash Children. After being forced to fight to the death, Haiji ended up being the only survivor after killing the rest of the human weapons. After escaping from Carlos, Haiji shows up in Eden years later as a reckless bouncer. The villain of the Fallen Angels is Carlos, who is an infamous crime boss and elite hacker. Prior to the events of the game, Carlos hacked into the CIA's database, which resulted in Harry Ness being deployed into Eden. Carlos is joined by Trigger, the sub-boss of the game, and an assassin hired by Carlos to be his bodyguard. Though the previous 8 characters are the only ones playable in emulated versions of the Fallen Angels, with Carlos and Trigger only playable by using MAME cheats, 4 scrapped characters were found in the game's files. Bear in mind that there is not a lot we know about these characters, so I can't show any footage of them. Snake is assumed to be a slimy person in pre-production storyboards found in the game's files. He appears to be an enemy of Taro's and is possibly a henchman of Carlos. Lapis is a 16-year-old high school student and treasure hunter who comes to Eden in order to retrieve an important artifact Carlos stole from her father, a professor. She was going to be more of a comic relief character as shown in scrapped content. Sid is a young Muay Thai fighter, and that's pretty much it. You can assume from pre-production storyboards that he dislikes Carlos and that he feels Carlos is responsible for the events ongoing in Eden, but that's it. Then we have Jimmy. Jimmy is a interesting character, given he was apparently going to fight completely naked despite having the anatomy of an action man. Storyboards seem to imply he's a relatively Urian, though this was likely a scrapped idea. He was kidnapped by Carlos and experimented on as part of his genetic weapon projects. So those are the characters that both are and aren't playable in emulated versions of the game. The game itself is pretty basic in terms of game modes. If you've played a 90s arcade fighting game, then you'll know what to expect here. There's simple arcade mode and 1 player versus 2 player are your only real options. There are no arcade endings, though there is evidence of them existing. Now, I am the last person to talk about gameplay in a fighting game. I'm a complete scrub when it comes to playing these things, and I'm only interested in the characters and story whenever I sit down to actually play one. That being said, I actually think the Fallen Angels plays pretty well. The highlight character for me is definitely Haiji Mibu, who's incredibly fun to play, but the rest of the roster range from pretty good to okay, and all use similar archetypes used in other fighting games. Though I'd hardly say this is the best gameplay in a fighter I've ever seen, it's good for an unfinished game and I enjoyed playing it. So that's basically the only playable build of Daraku Tenshi, the Fallen Angels. It's an incredibly fascinating game in my opinion, and I really wish we could have seen it fully realised back in 1998. Before I leave though, there's one more thing I want to point out about this game and its influence onto other games. You might be wondering what happened to Psikyo after they were forced to cancel their unfinished game. They carried on for a few more years but were ultimately made defunct in 2005. However, several people would leave the company shortly after the abandonment of Daraku Tenshi, with some forming their own company, while others went to work for a particular company that were taking their flagship fighting game series in a new direction. Yes, that's right, several developers on the Fallen Angels would go to work on the King of Fighters 99, which released a year after the doomed Daraku Tenshi was meant to release. Remember how I said there was something familiar about this GIF? Well, let's take a closer look at some of these designs, shall we? Notice anything familiar? How about now? Or now? Yep, that's right. Several of KOF 99's newcomers were directly inspired by the Fallen Angels roster. Cool's design here is almost one-to-one with Nest Saga hero K-Dash's design, with his feathered shoulders being used on 99 boss Chrysalin's coat. Harry Ness is a direct inspiration for many of Maxim's moves and overall design. Lapis, the scrapped character, was going to use a whip in her moveset, something that would later directly influence the creation of KOF 99's whip. Let's take another look at Chrysalid here, where we'll find even more nods to the Fallen Angels. The distinct mark over his eyes is exactly the same as Haiji Mibu's, whose face and hair in general greatly resembles Chrysalid's. Better yet, do you know Chrysalid's main boss theme? It's a banger, but the name is very interesting once you learn of this game's existence. What's the name, I hear you ask? Dear Fallen Angel. A mere coincidence? Perhaps. Or maybe it's a solemn salute to the game that never was, from the people who were forced to leave it behind. An ode to a game that never had the chance to see the light of day. Or did it? In 2019, the impossible happened when Zerodiv announced that they were working on a complete version of Daraku Tenshi The Fallen Angels to be released for arcades then consoles in 2020. Promising to include the 4 unfinished characters as well as numerous adjustments, the announcement was a dream come true for many. Unfortunately, COVID-19 rocked the world last year and we've not heard anything on the Fallen Angels Complete Edition since, but fingers crossed we hear an update soon. Regardless, even if Zero Div are unfortunately forced to once again leave the game on the cutting room floor, it's still worth getting your hands on this game through other means and trying it for yourself. Though the title of this video may end up being clickbait for some people, this game is truly one of the more fascinating unfinished games I've ever come across. The moment I saw that GIF, I knew this was a game I had to take the time to look into, and I'm glad I did. Hopefully by the time you finish this video, you'll feel the same need to dive into it and experience it for yourself. In case we never meet again, here's to you, you fallen angels.
We await your return, warrior.